Yes, you're finally here. Hello, my dear fellow time traveler, welcome back. You know, there are so many places we can visit, so many moments in history we can attend. But today let me lead you through the streets of Florence. Or wait, is that Florence? Well, fear not, my friend, we are of course going to discuss the glorious and magnificent Renaissance. The very word Renaissance means rebirth, and what better way to be reborn than reusing old ideas? After all, they worked great back in the days of the Greeks and Romans, didn't they? So why not try again? That is exactly what happened when Europe decided to hold on to those Greco-Roman ideals and tried to emulate the ancient past. Well, before we go any further, I would like to ask you to please subscribe. Just click on that red button below and help me reach my goal. Thank you. Alright, now back to our journey. Let's start with Italy. Why Italy? Because the Renaissance started right there. Why did it start there? Well, some factors had to align first, and they did. First of all, Italy was at the forefront of trade during the late Middle Ages. Italian merchants established networks throughout the Mediterranean, engaging in commerce with the Middle East and Northern Africa. Through their ventures, they amassed considerable wealth and created a rising middle class that became key to patronizing arts and sciences. Secondly, Italian city-states benefited from the influx of gold and silver looted by Spanish conquerors from the Americas. Those resources funded artistic patronage, contributing significantly to the flourishing of the arts. Thirdly, the Catholic Church, a major landowner in Italy, used its wealth to support construction projects. And guess what? Building magnificent churches was the best way to gain fame and fortune as an artist back then. Finally, the rediscovery of Roman ruins and artifacts captivated the imagination of Italians, leading to a sense of pride in their shared heritage. Classicism became a symbol of Italy as identity and inspired artists to emulate the perceived grandeur of ancient Rome. All of this began in the 14th century and lasted until the 16th century. During that time, a lot of important things happened. The Renaissance witnessed significant advancements in various fields of knowledge. Let's have a look at each of them. In architecture, Brunelleschi's groundbreaking work on linear perspective revolutionized the depiction of space and depth in paintings, enabling artists to create incredibly realistic scenes. His innovations were instrumental in shaping Renaissance art. Speaking of art, don't even get me started on the masters who lived during that time. Giotto, Donatello, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Raphael, Titian, just to name a few. They created breathtaking masterpieces that continue to captivate audiences today. The Last Supper, David, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Venus de Milo, Mona Lisa, just to name a few of those masterpieces. How about literature? Petrarch, the Boccaccio, Erasmus, Shakespeare, Cervantes. Need I say more? But it wasn't all sunshine and roses. The Renaissance also had its fair share of problems. For example, religious conflicts, such as the Reformation, shook Europe, challenging long-held beliefs and creating divisions that would have a lasting impact on society. Also, remember how we mentioned that wealth started to accumulate in the hands of a few? Well, that also resulted in increased social tensions and inequality. Additionally, the Renaissance coincided with the beginning of the slave trade, which brought unimaginable suffering and exploitation. However, in spite of all of that, the Renaissance was a truly unique moment in history. It was a period when humans realized their own potential and decided to take control of their future. The spirit of inquiry, curiosity, and innovation that characterized the Renaissance set the stage for the modern world. It was during this time that the foundations of classical liberalism, secularism, and democratic ideals were laid, ideas that would later shape revolutions and transformations across the globe. So what were the main characteristics of the Renaissance? Well, first of all, it was a period of intense cultural and intellectual activity, a rebirth of interest in classical antiquity, and a celebration of human potential and achievement. Humanism, a philosophical movement emphasizing the importance of human reason and ethics, became a central feature of Renaissance thought, influencing fields such as literature, art, and science. The Renaissance also witnessed remarkable advancements in science and exploration, with pioneers like Copernicus, Galileo, and Magellan challenging established theories and expanding knowledge about the natural world. Another important characteristic of the Renaissance was its focus on realism and naturalism. Renaissance artists, including Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael, were renowned for their ability to depict the natural world with accuracy and lifelike detail. Their works showcased a keen observation of nature and a mastery of perspective and anatomy. Overall, the Renaissance marked a profound shift in European history, bridging the Middle Ages and the modern era. Its emphasis on classical antiquity, humanism, and scientific inquiry laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So what are some important dates to remember when studying the Renaissance? Well, let's begin with the approximate dates of the Renaissance itself. Generally, it is considered to have begun in the 14th century in Italy and lasted until the 16th century. Within this time frame, several key events and developments shaped the course of the Renaissance. For example, the Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, hit Europe in the mid-14th century, leading to massive population loss and significant social and economic changes. The Renaissance began in Italy in the 14th century and spread to other parts of Europe during the 15th and 16th centuries. In 1453, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos successfully defended Constantinople against an invading Ottoman army, preventing its capture. However, following his death, the Ottomans under the leadership of Sultan Mehmed II conquered Constantinople in the same year, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire. The fall of Constantinople had a profound impact on the Renaissance. Many Byzantine scholars and intellectuals fled to Italy, bringing with them ancient Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved in the East. This influx of classical text sparked a renewed interest in antiquity and contributed to the intellectual ferment of the Renaissance. As we come to the end of our journey through the Renaissance, consider supporting us if you've enjoyed learning about this incredible period. Your support will help us continue creating engaging content and bringing history to life for fellow learners like you. Thank you for joining us on this adventure through time. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Your feedback is essential to keep us motivated and producing more quality content. Thanks for watching. Architecture as a manifestation of culture, among the first to reflect changes in society, especially when those changes are as grand as the ones Europe experienced during the Renaissance. The word Renaissance itself means rebirth in French, and this rebirth was felt in every field of art. But among the most important fields where this transformation was most prominently displayed was undoubtedly architecture. The architects of the Renaissance turned towards the ruins of ancient Greece and Rome to reevaluate how they had created their buildings. They studied how the ancient architects had combined geometric abstraction with nature as harmonious ratios to create the perfect form and balance, both visually and philosophically. With this, they were not only drawing inspiration from the aesthetic form of classical antiquity, but were also trying to understand the geometric and philosophical principles that laid underneath the forms. This return to the past was not meant to replace what was being done in the present, but to rebel against it, mainly against the prevalent Gothic style of the Middle Ages, which was very popular up until the 16th century. The excessive ornamentation of Gothic architecture was seen as overly complex and something that distanced itself too much from the purity and harmony found in classical architecture. This movement began in Italy because this was where the Roman Empire once stood and where the greatest amount of Roman ruins can still be found today. And it started off as a study of these ruins. From there, the architects drew out the rules of proportions and symmetry that could then be used in building new structures. A prime example of this is Filippo Brunelleschi, who is considered one of the pioneers of Renaissance architecture. He made meticulous drawings of Roman ruins, paying attention to details like the overlapping of parts and the geometry of curves. He even went so far as to conduct experiments with bronze models to test his ideas about how forms would appear from different viewpoints and at various distances. These studies led him to formulate rules of proportion and symmetry, which he then applied when designing the dome of Florence Cathedral. This dome, completed in 1436, was not just an imitation of Roman style, but an evolution of it. It combined a new structural technique with the classical orders and geometry. In fact, Brunelleschi had to introduce new technology and construction methods to achieve his design. For instance, he used double-walled brickwork with a sand layer in between for insulation. Additionally, he designed ingenious systems of scaffolding and cranes to lift and position the heavy stones. Through this, he not only revived interest in classical architecture, but also pushed the boundaries of engineering and construction techniques. Brunelleschi's contemporaries and followers, including Leon Battista Alberti and Andrea Palladio, further developed this approach. They, along with many others, were fascinated by the Roman architect Vitruvius and his work De Architectura. In this treatise from the 1st century BCE, Vitruvius not only explained the technical aspects of building construction, but also discussed the philosophy and aesthetics of architecture. His ideas formed the basis of the theory for classical architecture and became a fundamental reference for Renaissance architects. One of the central themes in Vitruvius's work was the Vitruvian triad, which consisted of firmness, utility, and beauty. These three concepts represented the main pillars of architecture. Firmness referred to the structural stability and durability of a building. Utility pertained to its functionality and adaptability to human needs, while beauty encompassed the aesthetic harmony and visual appeal of the structure. Let's take a look at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, one of the masterpieces of Renaissance architecture. Its design was initially led by Donato Bramante and later developed by Carlo Maderno. The original design of the basilica was based on a Greek cross plan and embodied Bramante's concept of the harmonious central composition. He sought to create a space of ideal proportions and perfect symmetry, reflecting the divine order and balance of the universe. The facade of the basilica, although modified in later centuries, originally featured a massive triangular pediment supported by massive Doric columns. This design element was directly inspired by Roman architecture, particularly the Pantheon. Above the columns, there were statues representing various Christian virtues, contributing to the overall sense of grandeur and solemnity. The interior of the basilica was designed to evoke a feeling of awe and spirituality through its centralized plan, which eliminated the traditional division between nave and aisles. Instead, all these spaces converged towards the high altar at the center of the cross. This arrangement symbolized the universality of the Christian faith and the equality of all believers. The massive dome of St. Peter's Basilica, a prominent feature of Renaissance architecture, was designed by Michelangelo. It stands as a testament to the era's fascination with classical antiquity and its ability to combine artistic innovation with technical brilliance. The dome was not merely an ornamental feature, but a structural marvel that allowed for the construction of a large, column-free interior space, symbolizing the limitless power and majesty of God. Through its harmonious proportions, structural innovation, and deeply symbolic character, St. Peter's Basilica embodies the essence of Renaissance architecture and its profound impact on religious and secular architecture alike. In addition to their interest in the classical orders, Renaissance architects also showed a great deal of interest in the Roman villa. This was partly due to the rediscovery of Roman texts like Vitruvius's De Architectura, which provided insights into Roman building techniques and aesthetics. Roman villas were seen as the epitome of refined taste and classical elegance. They represented an ideal lifestyle that many wealthy patrons aspired to emulate. Architects like Andrea Palladio revived the Roman villa style, adapting it to the rural lifestyles of 16th-century Italian aristocrats. Palladio's villas were not just country estates, they were sanctuaries of peace and beauty, offering a retreat from the bustling city life. Villas such as Villa Rotonda showcased innovative features like the central plan, inspired by Roman precedents, but incorporated modern conveniences and reflected the humanist ideals of the Renaissance. They combined classical elements with contemporary needs, setting a precedent for future generations of architects. Palladio's work became highly influential, giving rise to a distinct style of rural architecture known as Palladianism, which later gained popularity in England and America. His designs played a pivotal role in shaping the image of the idyllic country estate and became a symbol of refined taste and cultivated leisure. However, it's crucial to remember that Renaissance architecture was not merely a carbon copy of the ancient world. Instead, it was a dynamic fusion of classical inspiration and original creativity. While embracing the legacy of Greece and Rome, Renaissance architects introduced their own innovations and stylistic nuances. They selectively adopted classical elements such as semicircular arches, columned porticos, and the use of natural forms as inspiration, infusing them with new meaning and purpose. For instance, the high Renaissance architect designer Baldassare Peruzzi introduced fantastical and exotic architectural elements, blending historical styles to create unique and dynamic compositions. His designs often included unexpected juxtapositions of classical orders and decorative motifs, blurring the boundaries between different historical periods. This eclectic approach challenged conventional notions of architectural style and paved the way for later movements like Baroque architecture. In conclusion, Renaissance architecture marked a significant departure from the medieval period, ushering in a new era of artistic and intellectual expression. By turning to the classical heritage of Greece and Rome, Renaissance architects discovered inspiration, balance, and order. Their innovative use of elements such as the dome, the basilica plan, and the villa style revolutionized the built environment. By understanding the context of their creative journey, we can truly appreciate the genius of these architects and their enduring contributions to the world of architecture. They took inspiration from Roman architecture, yet they did not imitate it blindly. Rather, they sought to understand its deeper meaning. They saw in Roman architecture a reflection of the perfection and order of the universe itself. They believed that by studying and emulating Roman techniques and aesthetics, they could create buildings that were not only beautiful, but also functional and harmonious. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting us so that we can keep bringing you more content. Thank you. The Medici, a patronage legacy that defined the Renaissance, imagines strolling through the sun-drenched streets of Renaissance Florence, a city that seems to burst at its seams with magnificent art and awe-inspiring architecture. Around you are masterpieces by Michelangelo, Brunelleschi, and Botticelli, all made possible by a family whose name echoes through time, the Medici. But who were the Medici? What made them become legendary patrons of the Renaissance? And how did their patronage shape the artistic, architectural landscape of Europe? Join us as we embark on a journey back to Renaissance Italy to unravel the Medici dynasty's story and discover why they remain synonymous with the epitome of Renaissance patronage. The rise of a dynasty from bankers to bankers. Our story begins in 14th century Florence, a city-state renowned for its wealth, trade, and burgeoning artistic spirit. Amidst this vibrant setting, a family of bankers named Medici began to make waves. Foremost among them was Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, a shrewd banker who laid the foundation for the family's fortune through savvy financial dealings, primarily with the powerful English king, Edward III. As the Medici fortune grew, so did their influence in Florence. By the mid-15th century, Cosimo de' Medici, the grandson of Giovanni, had solidified the family's position, amassing immense wealth and wielding significant political clout. Cosimo's ascent to power, however, was not without challenges. Florence's government, a complex system of guilds and merchants, initially kept the Medici in check. Yet Cosimo's political acumen and strategic alliances eventually led him to become one of the city's priors, a ceremonial role that underscored the family's stature. Despite this foray into politics, Cosimo's true passions lay in banking and, above all, philanthropy. He saw himself as a patron, a title bestowed upon those who supported and encouraged artists. This calling was deeply ingrained in him, possibly influenced by his Dominican upbringing, which placed great importance on civic duty and service to the community. A new artistic dawn, humanism, and the Medici vision. The Medici's patronage was deeply rooted in the intellectual currents of the time, humanism. This philosophical movement championed a renewed interest in classical antiquity, both in art and in letters. Humanist art, inspired by Greek and Roman models, emphasized balance, harmony, and the idealization of the human form. This aesthetic sensibility dovetailed perfectly with the Medici's desire to present themselves as cultured patrons with refined tastes. Furthermore, humanism's focus on civic virtue and the common good resonated with the Medici's growing political ambitions. By supporting artists who depicted virtuous citizens and celebrated civic life, the Medici could enhance their own public image while contributing to the cultural enrichment of Florence. Among the first to benefit from Cosmo's patronage was the sculptor Donatello's, a pivotal figure in the early Renaissance. Cosimo recognized Donatello's genius and provided him with ample opportunities to showcase his talent. One of the most iconic examples of this collaboration was the bronze sculpture of David, now at the Accademia Gallery. This masterpiece, completed in 1464, stands as a testament to the Medici's commitment to fostering excellence in the arts. It was a bold choice, depicting the biblical hero David before his battle with Goliath, symbolizing youthful strength and Florentine independence. The placement of the statue near the Palazzo Vecchio, a prominent government building, underscored the Medici's political leanings. By showcasing David, they identified themselves with the ideals of civic valor and youthful vigor. Another key beneficiary of Medici patronage was the architect Filippo Brunelleschi, whose innovative design for the Dome of Florence Cathedral revolutionized Renaissance architecture. The project, initiated by Humanity, faced numerous setbacks until Brunelleschi, inspired by Romanesque engineering, proposed a daring solution. His plan consisted of a double dome, with the outer dome made of brick and the inner dome, a self-supporting rib vault, made of stone. Although the project was met with initial skepticism, the Medici, recognizing its potential grandeur, provided crucial financial backing. By 1436, thanks to Brunelleschi's ingenious design and the Medici's steadfast support, the dome, one of the largest in the world, was complete. Its harmonious proportions and structural audacity marked a departure from the medieval past and ushered in a new era of architectural possibility. Painting perfection, Botticelli and Michelangelo as the Medici's patronage blossomed, so did their sphere of influence. By the late 15th century, Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, had solidified the family's position, making Florence a hub of Renaissance culture and power. Under his leadership, the family's artistic patronage reached new heights, with one of their most notable protégés being the painter Sandro Botticelli. Born Alessandro di Mariano di Filippi, Botticelli's career took off when he entered the Medici orbit. Lorenzo, recognizing his exceptional talent, commissioned him to create some of the most enchanting works of the Renaissance. One such masterpiece was The Birth of Venus, now in the Uffizi Gallery. Inspired by classical mythology and the humanist celebration of beauty, this painting epitomized the Medici's aesthetic sensibilities. Venus, born from the sea foam, emerges as the personification of beauty, aligning with the Medici's desire to be seen as patrons of refinement and elegance. Yet Botticelli's association with the Medici was not without its complexities. Later in his career, he became involved in the controversial preaching of the Dominican monk Girolamo Savonarola, who denounced the Medici's moral laxity and worldly pleasures. This shift in allegiance reflects the turbulent times in which Botticelli lived, caught between religious fervor and the allure of humanist aesthetics. Despite this later departure, Botticelli's early works commissioned by the Medici stand as cornerstones of Renaissance painting, exemplifying the fusion of classical inspiration and humanist ideals that defined the era. Michelangelo, the Renaissance Colossus. Amidst the pantheon of Renaissance artists, Few loom as large as Michelangelo Buonarroti Simone, the quintessential Renaissance man whose genius spanned sculpture, painting, poetry, and architecture. Michelangelo's prodigious talent was evident from his earliest works, but it was under the Medici's patronage that he received the training and opportunities that shaped him into a master. The Medici's support not only nurtured his artistic growth, but also profoundly influenced the trajectory of Renaissance art. Lorenzo de' Medici's keen eye for talent spotted the 13-year-old Michelangelo's potential and brought him to the Medici court as an apprentice. Here, amidst the stimulating environment of the Medici gardens, Michelangelo developed his skills, studying ancient sculpture and absorbing the artistic atmosphere of the time. However, Michelangelo's association with the Medici was not without its dramatic moments. His early David, now at the Accademia Gallery, was initially commissioned by the rival Albizzi family as a symbol of youthful resistance against the oppressive Medici. Yet the Medici's political maneuvering shifted the tides, and the statue ultimately came to symbolize Medici Florence. But Michelangelo's genius would come to define the Medici dynasty forever. The Medici Chapel, a family mausoleum, was to be his most ambitious project. Here, in the heart of the Medici dynasty's power, Michelangelo's sculptures would immortalize two of the most prominent Medici members, Lorenzo the Magnificent and his son, Giuliano. Michelangelo's approach was unconventional, to say the least. Rather than presenting idealized versions of the Medici, he depicted them in their mortal forms, expressing grief and pain. This raw honesty infused the sculptures with a powerful realism, elevating them from mere tomb figures to profound meditations on life, death, and the human condition. This series of sculptures, along with Michelangelo's other works, cemented his status as the preeminent sculptor of the Renaissance. His genius, nurtured by the Medici, reshaped the artistic and architectural landscape of the Renaissance. Enduring legacy, the Medici and the enduring allure of Renaissance art. As the Medici dynasty wove its legacy into the fabric of Renaissance Florence, its influence radiated far beyond the realm of art. Their strategic marriages forged connections across Europe, extending the reach of Renaissance ideals to courts and kingdoms that had never seen the bustling streets of Florence. When Catherine de' Medici ascended to the French throne as Queen Isabella of the Medici, she carried with her the artistic sensibilities of the Italian Renaissance, commissioning works from the likes of Rosso Fiorentino and Bronzino, thereby transplanting Florentine styles onto the grand stages of French royalty. This role in disseminating Renaissance ideas across Europe secured the Medici's place in history as pioneers of a cultural movement that transcended borders and time. The Medici's impact on Renaissance architecture is equally profound. Their vision transformed Florence into a living gallery of architectural marvels. From the majestic facade of the Medici Palace to the breathtaking interiors of the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore, every stone bears witness to the Medici's commitment to the revival of classical aesthetics. The very skyline of Florence, dominated by Brunelleschi's awe-inspiring dome, is a testament to the Medici's patronage of architectural innovation. Their legacy in architecture is not just about aesthetics. It's about pushing the boundaries of what was structurally possible. It's about creating spaces that inspire awe and wonder. In conclusion, the Medici family's contribution to the Renaissance was monumental. They were not just padrones, they were visionaries. They recognized the transformative power of art and architecture, and they wielded that power with finesse. Their legacy lives on in the art and architecture that they patronized, which continues to captivate audiences centuries later. The Medici's story is a testament to the profound impact that individuals can have on the course of cultural history. It's a reminder that behind every masterpiece, there's often a patron whose vision made the masterpiece possible. If you found this video insightful, please consider subscribing for more journeys through history. In the heart of Florence, Italy, stands a colossal testament to human ambition and ingenuity, the magnificent dome of Santa Maria del Fiore, also known as the Florence Cathedral. Its grandiosity overwhelms all who behold it. But there's more to this architectural marvel than meets the eye. It carries within it a secret, a hidden narrative of a daring gamble that forever changed the course of architectural history. It was the year 1420, and for nearly a century, Florence had been struggling to complete its most prized possession, the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. Construction of the cathedral began in 1296, and by the start of the 14th century, it had taken shape as a vast structure with a rectangular floor plan. However, the ambitious design included a circular dome at the crossing of the nave and the transepts, and no one could figure out how to build it. You see, when Arnolfo di Cambio first sketched his plans for the cathedral, he envisioned a massive octagonal dome, 45 meters in diameter, sitting atop the crossing. It would be even bigger than the Pantheon in Rome, the largest dome in the world up until that point. But by the early 1400s, when construction reached the base of the dome, the best minds in Florence couldn't figure out how to make Arnaldo's dream a reality. To make matters worse, the citizens of Florence were growing impatient. They wanted their cathedral to be the crowning jewel of the city, not some half-finished eyesore. So in 1418, the city's government decided to hold a contest. Calling all architects, engineers, and madmen, they challenged anyone who was crazy enough to take the job to step forward with a solution. The prize, a lifetime supply of fame and fortune. And if they didn't like your solution, you might end up in jail or worse. Among the many submissions, one stood out above the rest, both literally and figuratively. It was the design of a little-known goldsmith named Filippo Brunelleschi. Now, you're probably wondering, why would a goldsmith be interested in designing a dome? Well, let me tell you, this was no ordinary goldsmith. Brunelleschi was an artist, inventor, engineer, and mathematician. He was also completely insane. Okay, maybe don't listen to him. I'm just kidding. Brunelleschi was actually quite sane, but his plan was anything but conventional. Let me explain. You see, the biggest problem facing Brunelleschi was not a lack of construction techniques, but rather a lack of structural physics. For centuries, architects had been taught that domes could only be built by following a few set rules. First, the dome must be built over a square or rectangular base. Second, the dome's ribs had to follow a pointed arch shape. And third, the dome required either internal or external buttresses to keep it stable. These rules had been established by Roman engineers and were considered immutable laws of nature, or so everyone thought. But Brunelleschi saw things differently. Inspired by the classical Romans, he rejected the medieval reliance on buttressing and developed a radically new concept, a self-supporting double-shell dome. His design consisted of two contiguous spherical shells, one inside the other, with the space between them filled with lightweight brickwork. This design was not only structurally efficient, but it also allowed for larger windows, providing more natural light to the interior. Plus, it looked pretty amazing too, but the real genius of Brunelleschi's design was the construction method. Forget scaffolding, Brunelleschi's design relied on geometry to provide support. Each course of bricks was laid in a herringbone pattern that extended around the entire dome, interlocking with the courses above and below it. This created a stable triangular lattice that could support the weight of the upper courses, allowing for the dome to grow upward without collapsing. But this was not a new idea. Ancient Roman builders had used a similar technique in smaller domes, but Brunelleschi applied it on a larger scale than anyone before him, and he did it without any advanced tools or equipment. I mean, heck, they didn't even have steel reinforcement or concrete back then. To solve this problem, Brunelleschi came up with another ingenious solution. He embedded iron chains within the masonry of the dome, running around its circumference like giant hoops. These chains, along with the stone rings embedded around the dome's base and key sections, acted as tension rings, pulling the dome outwards and counteracting the inward thrust. Not only did this solution defy the structural norms of the time, but it also pushed the limits of technology. Brunelleschi's design required incredibly precise bricklaying and the use of sophisticated geometrical calculations to ensure the stability of the dome. But he wasn't done yet. Another major challenge was the logistics of construction. How could they get the materials and equipment to the top of a dome that was under construction? Back then, cranes and other lifting devices were in their infancy, and scaffolding was not strong enough to support the weight of the materials needed to build a dome of this size. Brunelleschi's solution was a novel system of hoists powered by oxen. These primitive hoists were essentially a series of inclined planes that used the power of oxen to haul materials up from the ground to the top of the dome. By using a system of pulleys and weights, he was able to raise materials to incredible heights without the need for tall scaffolding or cranes. This innovation alone revolutionized the way construction was approached in the years to come. Brunelleschi's dome was not just a marvel of engineering, but also a testament to the power of the human mind. By challenging the long-held beliefs about the limitations of construction, he proved that with innovation and hard work, anything was possible. Of course, I'm being a bit dramatic. Nobody died in this scenario, nor did anyone go to jail, but there was a lot riding on this dome. If Brunelleschi failed, well, there are plenty of pointy bits at the top of that cathedral for him to fall off. Fortunately, his dome stayed firmly on the building, and the people of Florence were overjoyed. When it was completed in 1436, the dome of the Florence Cathedral was the largest in the world, a title it still holds today. It marked a new era in architecture, one that embraced scientific principles and innovative construction methods. Brunelleschi's legacy lived on through his students and contemporaries, inspiring some of the greatest works of Renaissance architecture, including the Dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, even today. His work continues to influence architects and engineers around the world. And here's the kicker: while we may never know the full extent of Brunelleschi's genius, we can still marvel at his greatest accomplishment, the magnificent Dome of Santa Maria del Fiore, a monument to human ingenuity and a symbol of the limitless potential of the human mind. Now, I've been your host. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to stay tuned for more. Until then, keep thinking. The Renaissance was more than just a revival of classical art and ideas, it was a transformation. The world was changing, and the Renaissance artists recognized that the classical world they were rediscovering also had to change if it was to speak to their contemporary audience. They took classical motifs and made them their own, creating works that are quintessentially Renaissance. So join me as we explore how Renaissance artists reinterpreted the classical past to create something truly new. At the heart of this transformation was the rediscovery of classical antiquity. After the fall of Rome, much of classical art and literature faded into obscurity, surviving only in fragments or through the medieval lens of authors like Ovid. But by the 14th century, Italian scholars and artists began unearthing ancient statues, studying forgotten texts, and contemplating the architectural ruins around them. This wasn't just a revival of interest, it was an active dialogue with the past. Sculptors like Donatello examined Roman busts to understand proportion and expression, while Brunelleschi studied the Pantheon's dome to revolutionize architecture. This engagement was so profound that classical antiquity ceased to be just a historical relic and became a living source of inspiration. But what exactly sparked this renewed interest in the classical world? One key factor was the growing influence of humanism, a philosophical movement that shifted focus from the divine to the human experience. Humanists like Petrarch and Erasmus championed the study of rhetoric, history, and moral philosophy. This emphasis on human potential and earthly concerns had a profound impact on art, shifting the subject matter and purpose of creative works. The classical world, with its emphasis on human achievement and its secular myths and stories, became a natural fit for this new humanist outlook. For instance, classical literature provided a wealth of material for artists to adapt. Stories like the Trojan War, the adventures of Odysseus, or the myths about gods and heroes offered compelling narratives that could be interpreted through a humanist lens. A prime example is Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, which drew upon the classical myth of Aphrodite's birth, but imbued the goddess with a delicate grace that spoke to Renaissance ideals of harmony and refinement. This fusion of classical narrative with humanist values was a hallmark of Renaissance art. Another aspect of humanism was its celebration of individual worth. Classical art often depicted idealized versions of humans, but Renaissance artists built upon this by imbuing their works with an emotional depth and psychological complexity that celebrated the uniqueness of each person. Take, for example, Michelangelo's David. While David was a biblical figure, the sculpture was deeply informed by classical ideas of heroic beauty and strength. The work transcended its religious context, becoming a symbol of human potential and the triumph of good over evil. It celebrated both the divinity bestowed upon David and the young man's own courage and determination. Similarly, classical sculpture often celebrated physical perfection and idealized beauty. Think of the graceful lines and flawless forms of Greek marble statues. Renaissance artists embraced this ideal, but they also introduced a new element, human imperfection. Works like those of Michelangelo and Raphael showed figures with subtle variations in anatomy and expression, acknowledging the uniqueness of each individual. This approach can be seen in Raphael's School of Athens, where Plato and Aristotle are depicted with different expressions and gestures, emphasizing their individuality and unique perspectives. Of course, classical art wasn't the only influence shaping Renaissance aesthetics. Naturalism, a key feature of Renaissance art, aimed to depict the world in a lifelike manner, emphasizing accuracy and detail. This was partly inspired by the scientific studies of the natural world that characterized the Renaissance, such as Leonardo da Vinci's meticulous anatomical drawings. These studies of human and animal anatomy led to a more realistic and nuanced depiction of the natural world in art. Artists like Andrea del Sarto and Andrea Mantegna achieved remarkable precision in their portrayals of plants, animals, and even geological formations. Naturalism was not just about replicating appearances, though. It was also about understanding the underlying order and harmony of the natural world. This reflected a broader Renaissance fascination with uncovering the underlying principles or rules governing various phenomena, from astronomy to economics. This desire for understanding and classification led to a surge in collecting and dissecting specimens, as well as detailed anatomical studies. As artists absorbed and built upon these new scientific insights, they incorporated them into their works. The result was a more realistic and lifelike representation of the natural world in art. Looking at the bigger picture, it's clear that the classical revival wasn't a singular event, but a multifaceted phenomenon encompassing various intellectual, artistic, and cultural currents. The rediscovery of classical texts and artifacts sparked a renewed interest in classical languages, literature, and philosophy. Scholars like Poggio Bracciolini unearthed manuscripts containing classical works that had been lost to the medieval world. This rediscovery, coupled with the invention of printing, allowed for the wider circulation of classical texts. The humanist emphasis on studying classical antiquity led to a growing awareness and appreciation of the classical past. Scholars began to critically examine classical sources, separating them from medieval interpretations and forging a more authentic understanding of antiquity. This critical approach laid the groundwork for modern historical study. Moreover, the renewed interest in the classical world stimulated the study of archaeology and classical languages. Excavations at sites like Herculaneum and Pompeii brought ancient artifacts and artworks directly into Renaissance spaces, influencing artistic styles and fueling the imagination of intellectuals. This combination of rediscovery, accessibility, and critical study gave rise to a deep appreciation for classical art and culture, setting the stage for the Renaissance's classical revival. Finally, let's talk about technique. Renaissance artists were not content with simply replicating classical styles. They sought to understand and improve upon them. One significant development was the study of linear perspective, a technique that creates the illusion of depth and space on a flat surface. Masacci's use of perspective in the Holy Trinity at Santa Maria Novella was revolutionary, giving the painting a sense of depth and realism previously unseen in Western art. Artists studied the works of classical masters, not just to emulate their style, but to dissect and understand their techniques. They examined how classical sculptors achieved balance and harmony, how architects created structural stability, and how painters mixed colors to evoke certain effects. This deep engagement with classical art led to a fusion of classical and Renaissance styles, resulting in works that were both innovative and deeply rooted in tradition. One great example of this fusion was in painting, where artists combined classical subject matter with Renaissance techniques and ideas. For instance, take a look at Raphael's The School of Athens. It depicts a gathering of ancient Greek philosophers, including Plato and Aristotle. Yet it's clearly a Renaissance work with its emphasis on humanism and classical learning. The figures are not just idealized abstractions, but individuals with distinct personalities and expressions. The painting celebrates the pursuit of knowledge and the power of human reason, a distinctly Renaissance theme. Another example is Titian's Bacchus and Ariadne. The subject is drawn from classical mythology, but the painting's loose brushwork and vivid colors are characteristically Renaissance. The myth of Bacchus and Ariadne was a popular one in classical art, but Titian's version infuses the story with a distinctively Renaissance sensuality and passion. In conclusion, the relationship between Renaissance art and classical antiquity was one of close engagement, adaptation, and reinvention. Renaissance artists didn't just imitate the classical past, they engaged with it, critiqued it, and ultimately reshaped it to fit their contemporary world. They saw classical art not as a static relic, but as a living tradition that could and should evolve. The result was a rich, dynamic artistic tradition that drew upon the best of the classical world while incorporating new ideas and techniques. This fusion of old and new is what makes Renaissance art so compelling and why it continues to inspire and captivate audiences today. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and joining our community of curious learners. And if you'd like to support us, we've got some perks to say thank you. Until next time, keep asking questions. Hello everyone, today we are going to explore the influence of Renaissance architecture on modern buildings. Make sure to watch till the end because one of the examples outlines show you will surprise you. First of all, if you are new here, welcome. I am an architect and here we talk about architecture and design. If you love the topic, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on future videos. Now let's get started. The Renaissance was a period of cultural and intellectual rebirth that took place in Europe from the 14th to the 17th century. It marked a transition from the medieval era to modernity, characterized by a renewed interest in classical art, literature, and philosophy, as well as significant advancements in science, technology, and exploration. The Renaissance began in Italy and then spread to the rest of Europe, including France, Germany, England, and Spain. It was a gradual process that spanned several centuries and had a profound impact on European society, economy, and culture. The Renaissance was a complex and multifaceted period that defies simple categorization. However, some of its key characteristics include humanism, which emphasized the importance of human reason and individual potential. Classical revival, which drew inspiration from ancient Greek and Roman art and architecture, and secularism, which promoted a greater interest in worldly matters rather than purely religious ones. The Renaissance also witnessed significant advancements in science and technology, including the development of new instruments for navigation and exploration, as well as breakthroughs in astronomy and mathematics. These innovations allowed Europeans to explore and conquer new lands, trade routes, and ideas. Overall, the Renaissance was a transformative period in European history that laid the foundation for the modern world. Its emphasis on humanism, classical ideals, and scientific inquiry profoundly influenced subsequent intellectual, artistic, and cultural movements. So how did that affect architecture, Well, in terms of architecture, the Renaissance marked a departure from the dominant Gothic style of the preceding medieval era. While Gothic architecture was characterized by verticality, pointed arches, and intricate ornamentation, Renaissance architecture sought to revive the classical principles of ancient Greece and Rome. This shift was part of a broader cultural movement known as Humanism, which emphasized the importance of human reason and achievement. Renaissance architects studied the works of ancient Roman masters like Vitruvius and Palladio, and they were inspired by the symmetry, proportion, and geometric clarity of classical buildings. They incorporated elements such as columns, pilasters, and entablatures, as well as new technologies like linear perspective to create harmonious and visually appealing spaces. Some of the key features of Renaissance architecture include 1. Symmetry and proportion. Renaissance architects emphasized balance and harmony in their designs, using mathematical ratios and geometric principles to create well-proportioned buildings. 2. Linear perspective. This technique, pioneered by Filippo Brunelleschi, created the illusion of depth and space by converging lines to a vanishing point on the horizon. 3. Classical orders. The Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders were revived and adapted to create a sense of grandeur and sophistication. For human scale, Renaissance architects considered the needs and proportions of human beings when designing buildings and spaces. 5. Naturalistic decoration. Instead of the highly stylized ornament of the Gothic period, Renaissance architects favored decorations inspired by nature and classical motifs. 6. The architect as artist and engineer. During the Renaissance, the architect emerged as a leading figure in the arts, combining the roles of artist and engineer to create innovative and harmonious buildings. One of the most influential figures in the history of architecture, Leon Battista Alberti, outlined these principles in his treatise, The 10 Books on Architecture, which became a standard text for generations of architects. As mentioned earlier, one of the hallmarks of Renaissance architecture was the revival of classical orders. These are the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian styles that were used extensively in ancient Greece and Rome. Each order has distinct characteristics in terms of its column design, proportions, and overall aesthetic. The Doric order, the simplest and most austere of the three, features unadorned columns with a simple capital and a plain frieze. The Ionic order, found in the second example, is more ornate and delicate, with slender columns, a more complex capital, and often decorated with volutes or spiral scrolls. The Corinthian order, the most elaborate of the three, features columns decorated with acanthus leaves and other natural motifs, creating a rich and luxurious appearance. These classical orders became central to architectural composition during the Renaissance, providing a framework for creating harmonious and balanced facades. Architects like Andrea Palladio and Sebastiano Serlio developed sophisticated systems for combining different orders to create a sense of visual unity and proportion. Another important contribution of Renaissance architecture, the concept of linear perspective, developed by the architect and engineer Filippo Brunelleschi. This technique revolutionized the way architects represented space and depth in their drawings and designs. Linear perspective is based on the fact that parallel lines that are actually straight appear to converge as they recede into the distance. By using this phenomenon, Brunelleschi created a system for representing three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. He is credited with creating the first linear perspective drawing of a Roman square, demonstrating the power of this new technique to create realistic and immersive views. Linear perspective became a fundamental tool for Renaissance architects, allowing them to create harmonious and visually appealing interiors and exteriors. It also played a crucial role in the development of painting and graphic arts during the Renaissance. But how does it apply to modern architecture? Well, the influence of Renaissance architecture on modern buildings is profound and far-reaching. Many contemporary architects continue to draw inspiration from the principles of symmetry, proportion, geometry, and the use of classical elements such as columns, domes, and arches. For example, the United States Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., is a prime example of neoclassical architecture, a style that emerged in the 18th century as a direct descendant of Renaissance principles. The building's imposing facade features a grand staircase and a series of arched windows set within a rusticated stone frame. The interior is adorned with classical motifs and sculptures, creating a sense of solemnity and grandeur that befits the nation's highest court. Another notable example is the Sydney Opera House, a 20th-century masterpiece that incorporates elements of both classical and modern architecture. The building's unique sail-like forms are clad in white tiles and set against a backdrop of Sydney Harbour. The interplay between the old and the new creates a striking visual contrast that is both memorable and thought-provoking. And while not literally using classical orders, architects in the late 20th century and 2000s have been reimagining them for new uses. For instance, the use of columns in modern buildings can be seen as a direct descendant of Renaissance tradition. In the case of the Pompidou Center in Paris, the columns are exposed as structural elements, creating a sense of openness and transparency. Similarly, the use of arches and vaults continues to be explored in contemporary architecture, as seen in the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto, where these elements are used to create a dramatic and ethereal interior space. Moreover, the influence of Renaissance architecture on modern design can be seen in the realm of residential homes as well. Many homeowners opt to incorporate classical elements, such as columns, pilasters, and symmetry to create a sense of elegance and timelessness in their living spaces. This trend can be seen in various styles of homes, from traditional to contemporary, demonstrating the versatility and enduring appeal of Renaissance design. Furthermore, the emphasis on proportion and symmetry in Renaissance architecture continues to inform contemporary design. Modern architects strive to create buildings that are visually harmonious and balanced, using mathematical ratios and geometric principles to achieve this effect. For example, the use of grids and modular systems in modern skyscrapers, such as the Burj Khalifa, allows for the creation of uniform and proportional facades that are visually appealing and structurally efficient. Additionally, the concept of the architect as both an artist and an engineer, as exemplified by Renaissance masters like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, continues to resonate in today's architectural profession. Modern architects must possess a unique combination of creative vision and technical expertise to produce innovative and sustainable designs. The fusion of art and science that characterized the Renaissance continues to define the practice of architecture the 21st century. In conclusion, the influence of Renaissance architecture on modern buildings is undeniable. From grand civic structures like the United States Supreme Court building to iconic cultural landmarks like the Sydney Opera House, the principles of symmetry, proportion, and the use of classical element continue to inform contemporary design. Moreover, the legacy of Renaissance masters like Brunelleschi and Palladio can be seen in the work of modern architects who incorporate classical orders and linear perspective into their designs. As we look to the future of architecture, we can expect that the timeless principles of Renaissance design will continue to inspire and guide architects as they create innovative and visually harmonious structures for generations to come. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them below. I would love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.